No, Falcons do not have the most firepower of all time, but I think they have some potential to get there depending on how the team develops and how Kyosuke ends up performing in the long term, because his potential upside is kind of insane when you look at it. But we do have to keep in mind when you're looking at this team, there have been super teams in the past, many of them. We had FaZe 2017, which if you don't know what Rain used to be, I think he came second in that year in HLTV. We had a Fnatic roster with Crims, Flusha, and Olaf, where Flusha I think came third in 2015. People say he was the best player on Fnatic. Some people say that, and he got robbed and should have been the best player of the year. People still think he might have cheated in 2015, and Crims was revolutionizing the idea of a support back when support and anchor were things that just never really mattered and nobody cared about because they weren't flashy. You know, you have Fallen Fur and Cold Zero on one team. You have all of these rosters. You even, at the moment, you have Spirit with Shiro, Tanir, and Donk, or previously Shiro, Tanir, or Shiro, Donk, and Zontix on the same roster. The thing is, those players didn't pop off the page with aggressiveness and flashiness in the same way, well, not the trio combined, in the same way that you see this Falcons roster. You know Monacy and Nico and Kyosuke can all pop off in that way. And they didn't play super team brand CS, which is I think what you're seeing from Falcons right now. You're seeing them play very aggressive, very individually willing to go for engagements, willing to go for fights, and they're doing quite well with it. However, I think there are downsides, and you have to look at that over the long run to see how their players continue to perform with the adjustment in roles. I think Kixan at the moment is clearly overperforming in this event. In fact, this is one of those events where everything is going so right so far for Falcons. I can forgive someone for thinking, wow, this is an incredible amount of firepower. This could be the most ever, because on a 6-map stage, they have absolutely dumpstered people. But when you're rating a team, you have to be looking at how things go when plan A isn't working perfectly, when you need to make an adjustment and you need to see how players can actually play when they have an off game or their opponents are having an incredible firepower game, and can they adjust? Because when you're looking at it, I think Nico is the player that now, especially on T sides a lot, but on both sides really, he's made a pretty notable adjustment in the way he's playing. And this honestly goes into the theory that Austin has, that each team needs to have an aggressive rifler, a passive rifler, and a hybrid rifler. And when you look at Falcons, they're kind of like Monacy with the rifle, more so than a lot of operas, is very aggressive as well. They're kind of like 4 aggressive riflers. I mean, even Kixan, he's more of a supportive rifler, of course, but for a supportive rifler, he probably fits a little more of an aggressive bill within that role, you know? And when you look at Nico, I don't want to say aggressive in the way that you think, okay, he's just like running around, he's feels the need to frag out. When I think aggressive, I'm thinking that their thought is to make a play. When it comes to the beginning of a round, they want to be set up to make the play themselves rather than setting someone else. And when you look at a hybrid, it's someone that has the ability to, sometimes he's going to be looking to make that play himself. He's going to be part of the play that the other player is calling, but he's also capable of being the one with the supportive mind where he sees a play and he calls, I'm going to flash for you, rather than can you flash for me, right? I actually think that's probably the most effective way to understand it, is when you notice a play, are you calling for it yourself or are you calling for it for a teammate? Although there's always going to be plays where you're going to be doing a little bit of both, but that's kind of the way, which one do you lean more towards, I think. And you look at this roster, you needed someone to take a bit of a hit. You needed someone to be that slightly more passive element in the team. And I think Nico has done a very good job swapping into that, where he's allowing, on T sides especially, he's now the lurk side of things rather than the pack player. On CT sides, he's going for a lot less openings. He's throwing flashes for his teammates to go for openings a little bit more often. You needed that adjustment. And when I look at T sides, especially when we get there, I'm actually really impressed with the potential this team has because of Nico specifically. Like, even if Nico, I think he's taking a bit of a statistical step backwards with the way he's performing right now. Not badly, but he's just, when you go into this slightly more passive role, you're probably not going to frag out in quite the same way on the scoreboard. Even if when you watch Nico play right now, he seems like he's playing as well as I've ever seen him play. You might see him take a half step back, but when he moves into these lurker roles, you look at him as a really good player that is also a really, really good lurker. And I want to contrast that to some other lurkers. I think Twist is the one I've mentioned a lot recently, so I'll mention him as well. Twist is a really good player that is in my opinion, he's in these half lurk roles, but he does well in them primarily because he's a really good player. He's fundamentally very solid. He has really insane mechanics and he can frag out. Whereas when I see Nico in the lurk roles, I see him doing well because he understands when and how to apply pressure, how to fake out opponents so you're applying pressure in the correct way and you're always getting people to look your direction when they don't necessarily want to be looking your direction. But you also know, okay, here's the round where I need to be the win condition, and here's the round where I can play a little more passive. I think some lurkers end up being these players. They're just really, really good, and they're also lurking, but they don't play the role quite effectively. Whereas Nico has been in this role in the past. He's done this many times before, and I think he excels in this type of kind of very much variable decision-making ability where he can go many different paths with how he can play. And he's still playing to support his teammates a lot in the early round, but in those mid rounds when things go wrong, he is so good at getting his team out of it. I think that's a really big upside for this team. But still, you have to look at them when things are going wrong, because right now you have Kixan at a 1.10 rating in this group stage. That is not normally, okay? That's Kixan. He's going for a lot of aggressive plays and he's getting the kill when he's supposed to be the one getting traded by someone beside him. He's getting the kill instead. And I think FaZe do actually a really good job. I mean, they get 2-0'd, they get destroyed, but I think they do a pretty good job of understanding where the weaknesses in Falcons are likely to be, and they try and attack those weaknesses, but Falcons are just fragging too effectively from even their weaker players for it to have any effect. And what I mean by understanding the weaknesses, I look at this game and I see that FaZe, they're not trying to finesse that much. You would expect that maybe against a super team like this, you're trying to do a little more finessing. You're trying to draw them out across the map. But I think counterintuitively sometimes, you actually might want to do a little bit of the opposite. Because if you try and play more finesse and you take control of areas with, two players, you might just get fragged off the server, right? They might try to be a little cutesy and you just can't win the aim duel, so you're just kind of slowly losing players over time as the round goes on, right? Instead, FaZe play a little more brute force style, and I think the idea is, hey, if they don't have a player, if they're all aggressive players, when things start to go wrong for them and they lose that first domino, they're going to struggle to adjust back off of it. They're going to take a little time to communicate, to set themselves back up into scenarios where it's a little easier, I think, to have a plan, to plan out something and then execute it because you know how things are, like how they're supposed to be set up in a 5v5. But once you get into these kind of chaotic scenarios that FaZe is really good in, then you need players making the right decision in a split second. And the right decision is oftentimes made with a teammate, right? You need two players on the same page. They kind of called that, hey, I don't think you're going to be able to do that. I think it was a smart call, but Falcons, they're fragging. Sometimes it's just going to be too damn good, especially when you have your IGL on a 1.10 and Kerrigan is on his 73rd, I think, event in a row with a negative KD. He's having himself a little bit of a struggle, but I actually think this is a kind of interesting round to look at. So FaZe, initially, they want to go for a B pop. Falcons are constantly in very good positions. They have a really good read of what FaZe are trying to go for. And then you end up in this kind of awkward situation where I think this is actually really interesting BO3 from an IGLing perspective. I think both IGLs did a really solid job of reading where their potential win conditions were in rounds and going with that. So in this round, I actually think there's a slight individual misplay, maybe from both teams. So Rain, he's smoking off through the lurk smoke and he's trying to catch a frag, not there. And you have 3 Bs still. At a minute left, if a mid B hit isn't coming in, you're looking at, this is a similar timing. This is around the time a short hit might be coming in. So what are they going to do? Nico's going to smoke off towards short, and you're going to have the B tons push come in at that exact moment. And Rain gets kind of unlucky on the timing there. I don't think he spots the players that are pushing just like as he's peeking to double check if someone's pushing. That's when they're pushing. I think he just doesn't quite spot them. So the initial kill goes their way. Then you have Nico, and you want, after this push into tunnels, you want the fast rotate to try and get this mid control so you can get over to A, because when that push comes in, Rain should have probably called 3 players there. You know FaZe is going to have to pivot into an A play fairly quickly. But Nico ends up staying here for quite a while, and you have this smoke just as Kyosuke was coming towards mid. The smoke drops, Jacob blocks that rotate, so it buys a little bit of time. Then Nico ends up sticking around, the smoke goes down, he's thinking maybe they're going to come through the smoke, but they're completely ready for him there, and they get the initial kill. And Jacob on the other side, and I think he's just a couple seconds late here, because I think he wants to try and get to the short hit before they actually make their way through that smoke, but he starts a little too late. And the moment this contact is made on short, that is the moment this player in tunnels is most likely to drop down and go for the play on you. But Jacob was kind of lazy in the way he cleared tunnels, even coming back through mid, and he's jumping up onto the box, trying to get his way onto short at the exact same time that play is most likely to come out of the tunnels player. And then they end up in this spot where if Jacob was still alive, especially if he had gotten a kill there, that was a very winnable round. And then you end up into this swing situation where, because they lost that, now they're going for this play where they have an AK up on Kerrigan, they have an op on Brokey, but they have very little. Like, this is a big swing round that could have changed the outcome of the half and made this a much more winnable game from FaZe. Instead, that goes wrong, and they end up in this where they're down 5-4, they're down 5v4, they're not in the greatest situation. But that's the type of thing where Kixan is the one that went for that play in through lower tunnels. His fragging this tournament has been a lot better than it usually is, despite whether or not he's a good fragging IGL in general. It's definitely been better than usual, and that's the type of play where on the kill on Rain, I think you double push tunnels so you can trade, and instead they get the initial kill instantly. They don't need to trade, and because they don't need to trade, it just the round completely topples for FaZe as things go on. And against pistols, of course, they do pretty much the same thing. If I was to look at this from a FaZe perspective, one of my biggest gripes is FaZe, when they're playing really good teams, they just don't convert their anti-ecos nearly as often as they should. I just don't like the way they play their anti-ecos. They constantly lose them, and they don't win as many forces and like semi-forces as you'd hope, at least to make up for it. But back into the game, you have Kerrigan going for short control pretty early. So it's going to be Kixan and Kyosuke holding onto the B site. You have some mid control, some short control by Kerrigan, but the exec comes in and Kixan rather, actually just completely shuts it down at the perfect timing. And if you look at this from FaZe's POV, the smoke comes down, Jacob is going to jiggle this, not see anyone at the box, and Kixan just stands up at the exact right moment to get that frag, and then Kyosuke just throws the smoke right afterwards, shuts this entire play down. You do have a surprising amount of team synergy from Falcons, more so than you might expect on a team like this, right? That they've actually, I think, they've been working on these things, but it does come down to plan Bs. And in fact, when you look at Falcons so far as a team, I think they've generally been struggling with plan Bs even before they picked up Kyosuke. When I looked at them bombing out of a couple of events with Degster, it was because Nico would have an off game, and when Nico had an off game, they didn't have a way to win other than Nico. Right? They didn't have a pivot point where they could play more tactical CS, where they could play some great execs and things that didn't rely on Nico being the main story. And I'm hoping now you might see that because they have Kyosuke, that's plan A. And then if plan A fails, well, you've got Nico there as well, and they've got some ideas on how to swap back into that. But we'll actually have to see, because I'm making this before the playoff match comes out. And if I was a little pansy-ass bitch, I would wait until after that playoff match to post this. But I'm not. I'm putting this out now, hopefully before the match happens, or even after, predicting them to lose. I'm not predicting them to lose. A lot of the time when you have this type of break, they've had a few days off. That is when the fragging starts to kind of wane, when you're all having great events. I'm very interested, though, to see how they perform when they go to the next event. I'm kind of holding my breath a little bit because I really do want this Falcons team to do well. I rate Kixan's IGLing quite highly. However, he's not. The way to think about IGL is that I think the community gets wrong is just because someone doesn't work as an IGL with one team doesn't mean he's a bad IGL. And I'm not saying that Kixan isn't working with this team, but I see too often people expect IGLs to be good at everything, to be able to call their team out of every scenario, to be able to call with all of their players playing well and all of their players playing terribly. You know, IGLs generally, in my eyes, have somewhat different styles and they have somewhat different strengths. You can be looser, you can be more rigid, you can be some IGLs, maybe even their calling isn't their best assets. It's their ability to keep their players in the game mentally. Like, there's so many things that go into IGLing. So when I look at Kixan, I see him as a good IGL in his own style, but that doesn't mean he's perfect. And I don't think he's necessarily the player that's going to be calling some Astralis type tactical CS on a regular basis, at least not with this roster. So when I look at Kixan, I kind of think of him in the Kerrigan school of IGLing, where he's really good at toppling the dominoes if his team can get the entries. If they can put it into a 4v4 or a 5v4 optimally, but like a 4v4, 3v3, I think he can turn the map on those scenarios and actually put them in winning situations or close out rounds from those positions. But he's not necessarily the most well-rounded IGL calling Astralis tactical style CS all the time that people want, that someone can call every type of CS. Regardless, looking at this round, this is the type of round that I think Falcons are going to excel at, because they go for this play and their firepower allows them to go for plays like this where they're just going to come out long, run straight out long. Monacy's not even going to throw the flash. They're going out dry, willing to trade because they've got Tezes and Monacy following behind Kixan with a Mac 10. Like, they're willing to accept that battle. Again, because everything's going right for them, Kixan still finds that kill. At the same time, you have Nico walk his way out mid and take the straight up duel against Rain, and you have Kiyosuke walk his way around the short smoke and take the duel against Kerrigan that he ends up losing, but then Kerrigan is completely trapped in position and the round is essentially over. But those are the types of plays that can look really dumb if you just get out-fragged. The point is, you call that style because of the players you're working with, right? You know they're supposed to be able to get those frags. My God, that was a clean shot from Kiyosuke. Kixan picks up the second. I mean, this is, again, FaZe trying to get inside of the planning of Falcons. They're trying to say, hey, if we give you space, if we allow you to play out rounds the way you want to, you're probably just going to out-frag us. But if we try and get aggressive and disrupt your planning, what are your protocols? Do you have a good protocol for how to do an A site exec with 3 players alive? You know, can you close out rounds from these awkward situations? I think Kixan's pretty good at calling those spots. And actually, by the way, I mentioned Nico being really good when it comes to lurking and understanding win conditions when lurking. I actually think Tezes is kind of underrated at that as well. I think he's very good as a theoretical lurker, knowing when to apply pressure and when not to, for a player that you don't necessarily think of, but I think he's got a lot more skills than people actually give him credit for. Still, this round is basically over. It's another round where FaZe just got kind of fragged off the server. So then you go into this, we're 11-6 down. Monacy, I have to imagine that is how you throw a corner smoke, by the way. So I'm pretty sure he just accidentally threw a molly, unless there's something I'm missing that looks very similar to the corner smoke lineup, but maybe, I don't know. Kiyosuke full whites himself, by the way. He actually just full whites himself. Look, Kiyosuke is good. He's got very snappy aim. He can do a lot of great things. He's still got some developing. He's still coming along. And the fact that he's as good as he is while he's still going to improve over time is kind of wild. Because I see him make kind of questionable decision making at times, make mistakes like that, and he's still so dominant. You know, if he can develop a little more, he's going to be insane. And this is the type of play I was talking about with Nico as a lurker, because he's initially blocking in mid, then he knows there's 3 players long, so he gets his way up short, and he's willing to take a bit of a risk here. Despite the fact that, I mean, it's 4v4, it's not a disadvantaged scenario, he still knows they use a lot of utility on long. He can catch a good timing to get a frag here. He waits for Brokey to be rotating down elevator, and Brokey's gonna look away at the exact last moment, get killed by Nico. And at that time, you have FaZe. They're trying to go for control in mid, because that's oftentimes the spot that is weakest when you're going for that sort of long control. Doesn't work out. And then you have Tezes that knows, hey, we just got that kill on Brokey. I can be a bit more aggressive on long. Kerrigan gets a kill. He knows there was 3 guys A to begin with. He knows where the players are. He knows there's only one A player remaining, and he gets the play out long. He even hesitates for a second because he knows, okay, I'm going to make sure that my players towards short are in position that if I die here, they can actually capitalize on it anyways. That's really good play from players that have to make their own decisions. They have the agency to go for a play when they think it's the right idea. And in this case, it absolutely was the right idea from all players involved. I mean, even if Nico had died to Brokey, he almost did. It was still a pretty solid idea to catch that player rotating back. And when he gets that kill, he's converting the round like 100% of the time. And then you end up 12-6 down. I mean, eventually you're going to have a round from Falcons where they're going to get a kill or two that they really just aren't supposed to be getting, right? And in this case, Tezes, even without the perfect pre-aim, he's looking for the player on top of the box there. Kerrigan knows he's there. He's got the right idea, holding his crosshair in the good spot, just gets owned. He just gets owned. That's one of the problems, by the way, and one of the reasons this kind of like donk peeking works is because Kerrigan is holding his crosshair very narrow to the corner, and Tezes, again, donk peek, whatever you want to call it, Tezes over peeks it, Kerrigan adjusts, but Tezes kind of had, even with a bad pre-aim, he's able to adjust because he's got Kerrigan adjusting his own crosshair, right? But that's a topic for a different video. 5v4, and you have FaZe. They just actually just straight up gamble on this one and say, hey, we're going to stay 3B. That's one of the, I mean, if you ever look for reasons to people like Kerrigan, it's calls like this, like just complete guts calls where it's just, I think I have the right read on this play. We're going to stick to it. And it's the right play because if they rotate off of this, there's a good chance they're going to lose anyways. So you have the players in the right position, but at some point you got to hit your shots. And Kixan gets 1, Kyosuke gets 2, round over, game over. Well played by Falcons. I like the way they're playing. The question is, what are they going to do when they're not hitting every shot? Where is their plan B effective? Or maybe they just stick with plan A and they are the best firepower of all time.